Sergei of Voronezh, the all-Russian founding father, established a very strict Cenobitic Pachomian order in his retreat at Sergeyev Posad. Sergei and his disciples set the highest example of humbleness, hard work, and self-sacrifice. Their virtues and spiritual achievements evoked great respect in the souls of people in power.
Once a peasant came to the monastery to meet Sergei and saw a humble monk wearing a miserable robe working in the field. And suddenly came a nobleman or a king and prostrated himself before the monk. "Who's that man?" the peasant asked. It was Sergei.
It was a matter of prestige for Russian barons, tsars, and nobles to make pilgrimages and donate to the treasuries of monasteries, as it was seen as a godly act. Thus, over the centuries, the largest monasteries managed to accumulate lots of wealth. Trinity Lavra of St. Sergius even lent enormous credits to tsars Mikhail Romanov, Alexei, and Peter the Great for military needs. The Kirillo-Belozersky Monastery was founded in 1397 by disciples of Sergei of Voronezh. This monastery, large, feudal, counted 21,000 peasants and 16 country areas as its property, had a huge influence on the fish trade, and was the biggest saltern in Russia at that time. Monasteries always served as prisons for many repressed and persecuted clergymen, politicians, and aristocrats. The most famous among them being Sheremetyev, Shusky, and Morozov, the ancestors of 3 branches of highly influential aristocratic lands. Monasteries became centers where the most precious books, frescoes, and icons were collected and stored. Some of these medieval centers of culture, for example Ferapontov Monastery, are now acknowledged by UNESCO to be World Heritage Sites. But there is nothing on earth that lasts forever. The church reforms of Peter the Great and Catherine II put an end to the broad power and influence of the monasteries.
Catherine closed 3/4 of all the monasteries and deprived the rest of their property. Maximilian Voloshin, a famous poet, said, "Peter was the first Bolshevik in the history of Russia." Aksakov said, "What Peter did was absolutely terrible. He acted with such irresistible cruelty and severity."
During the Soviet period, monasteries and hermitages were devastated and ruined. Their priceless possessions and relics were sold by the Bolshevik government. Convents were turned into prisons, orphanages, and mental hospitals. Several monasteries became museums. Some culturologists and museum attendants were brave enough to protect and save relics for future generations during the time of militant atheism. There is a saying, monasteries are a leaven for the church, and the church is a leaven for the state. The question arises, is there any cause and effect relationship between historical events and the spiritual state of society?
Varsanofy of Optina, speaking about the history of pre-Soviet Russia, said, "The revolution came from the seminary." Sounds crazy, but he was absolutely right. What is the seminary? It is an educational source for the whole church. The question is, what was happening to these spiritual centers in the beginning of the 20th century? Which virus infected it?
Вот о чем он говорит. Чем заражены-то были